I've always been fascinated by the personality types called curmudgeons. I'm not quite sure why. Perhaps they seem unbound by the constraints of society that the rest of us endure. Perhaps it's because they wear their humanity and contradictions so close to the surface. Perhaps it's because I've begun to recognize in myself some of the behaviors that I'm describing, and that's a little sobering sometimes. I first presented this topic as a sermon to the church in 2006. In fact, it was July of 2006, so almost exactly 20 years. With now 20 years of reflection, I am now more aware of myself as living in the world of those contradictions and taking on the responsibility for what that means in daily life. The term curmudgeon itself has an interesting history. 100 years ago, this is with the little assistance of ChatGPT telling me some of these contrasts, the term would have been used to describe someone who was ill-tempered or difficult to please, miserly or ungenerous, suspicious of others' motives, resistant to change, critical of younger generations, socially aloof or reclusive, quick to complain but slow to praise. The emphasis was often on someone who was genuinely unpleasant to be around. Today, the word has softened considerably. A modern curmudgeon is more likely to be one who is seen as habitually skeptical, dryly humorous or sarcastic, opinionated, nostalgic for how things used to be, resistant to fads and trends, willing to criticize popular culture or technology, and grumpy in an almost endearing way. And the term has not been one that has been demonized or forbidden in any of the by any sense of harm by labeling an individual in that way. So ChatGPT suggests that it is no longer a negative label, but often now carries a tone of reluctant admiration as curmudgeons are saying what others are thinking but won't say, rejecting superficial trends, maintaining high standards by using humor, irony, or sharp wit to express criticism. Still, while it still doesn't necessarily feel comfortable to be grouped with fictional characters such as Ebenezer Scrooge or Oscar the Grouch, other real-life modern curmudgeons such as Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, Dorothy Parker, George Will do have some admirable qualities. What do they add to our understanding of life and our place in our community and in the world? So we'll have a couple of readings of some curmudgeonly opinion and then get into the main part of the sermon.
Jenny Joseph, an English poet, wrote this poem in 1961 when she was 28 years old. Warning by Jenny Joseph. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I'm tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. You can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at a go or only bread and pickle for a week, and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. But now we must have clothes that keep us dry and pay our rent and not swear in the street and set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I am old and start to wear purple.
So a little disclaimer about the second reading. There's a lot of he, him pronouns. God is referred to with male pronouns, etc. But despite that, I think the message is a good one. Mark Twain from his notebook. If I were to construct a God, I would furnish him with some way and qualities and characteristics which the present lacks. He would not stoop to ask for any man's compliments, praises, flatteries, and he would be far above exacting them. I would have him as self-respecting as the better sort of man in these regards. He would not be a merchant, a trader. He would not buy these things. He would not sell or offer to sell temporary benefits of the joys of eternity for the product called worship. I would have him as dignified as the better sort of man in this regard. He would value no love but the love born of kindness is conferred, not that born of benevolence is contracted for. Repentance in a man's heart for a wrong done would cancel and annul that sin, and no verbal prayers for forgiveness be required or desired or expected of that man. In his Bible, there would be no unforgivable sin. He would recognize in himself the author and inventor of sin, and author and inventor of the vehicle and appliances for its commission, and would place the whole responsibility where it would of right belong, upon himself, the only sinner. He would not be a jealous God, a trait so small that even men despise it in each other. He would not boast. He would keep private his admirations of himself. He would regard self-praise as unbecoming the dignity of the position. He would not have the spirit of vengeance in his heart. Then it would not issue from his lips. There would not be any hell except the one we live in from the cradle to the grave. There would not be any heaven, the kind described in the world's Bibles. He would spend some of his eternities in trying to forgive himself for making man unhappy, when he could have made him happy with the same effort, and he would spend the rest of them in studying astronomy.
Thank you, Eli, and thank you, Neil. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to read much Mark Twain, he is really very cutting and very biting in the way that he goes after religion and some other things. There's one book that's one of my favorites. It's called Letters from the Earth. He actually wrote it, I believe, sometime prior to his death in 1910, but it wasn't published till 1960 by his family because I think they were afraid it was just too pointed and offensive to the world's religions for the most part. But he resonates a lot, I think, with a lot of us. So, the curmudgeon as a spiritual role model. In the vast array of world religions, we Unitarian Universalists are at somewhat of a ritualistic disadvantage. That which holds other faiths, which holds together other faiths, a common God, a common creed, we have chosen to reject. Our rituals, therefore, have to work without some essential props, making them sometimes broad and generic. We don't have any saints, but on the other hand, we don't have any officially designated devils. No novena candles to light, no Angelus bells or calls for noon prayer, no exorcisms. But what are the qualities of those we do hold out as role models? Those in our UU history and heritage who appear to embody the virtues and qualities we seek to emulate. We as humans are seen to be drawn to look up, so to speak, to those whom we perceive are better or more accomplished as human beings than we are, to those who have acted during their lives with grace, intelligence, wisdom, compassion. We identify these people as good and admirable people, those whom we would like to be like. And there are many of these good people who have Unitarian and Universalist roots. Susan B. Anthony and Paul Revere, stirring up the political scene. Horace Mann and Clara Barton, changing our expectations as a society. Louisa May Alcott and Charles Dickens, writing with inspiration. Samuel Morse and Joseph Priestley, using science so that we can know ourselves better. people of accomplishment, having led admirable lives. As we wind our way down our own spiritual paths, crossing ways with friends, family, and other church members as we go, and sometimes walking together for a while, it does help to have companions, even if they are no longer living, to assist us on the journey through their writings and their examples. So we may not have angels, and we may not have saints, but we do have role models. Over time, it seems that we look at our role models for the aspects of their lives that lead them to greatness and accomplishment. That's what we want to emulate, not the insufficiencies or inadequacies or the less than admirable behavior which may have been a part of these people and often which made them human. But these less than admirable parts of their lives also make them more real to us in some ways, and therefore, I contend, better companions on the journey. Frank Lloyd Wright, a great architect, whom we claim as one of ours, wasn't much of a family man. Actually, he was fairly irresponsible. Daniel Webster was a bit insufferable in person, so they say, and having coffee with Adlai Stevenson could put you to sleep. But I'd like to take that concept of looking at that less than admirable behavior a step further and look not at a particular person as a role model, but to look at a personality type, a person we would historically label as a curmudgeon as a role model. Not for all of us, certainly, but for a few of us who need inspiration from role models who don't hold any pretense to pure goodness as a necessary component of a good life. I've mentioned some descriptors of what makes a curmudgeon. The curmudgeon is often and typically identified by a cluster of behaviors, somewhat irascible, maybe crotchety. Well, Bruce the Bear is a pretty good example, I think, of. I have a theory that perhaps all bears may be curmudgeons, but I'm not willing to do the research, so if anyone else is up for that, that's fine. Cluster of behaviors, somewhat irascible, maybe crotchety, literate, and willing to speak out, having an irreverent attitude, dismissive of modern culture and society, humorous, reactive against injustice, and having an independent attitude. As examples, we could include Kurt Vonnegut, who, after claiming a non-deist humanist belief system, begins several passages of one of his final books, A Man Without a Country, with the phrase, "If I should ever die, God forbid." H.L. Mencken, who must have been very difficult to live with, and even George Will. Will Rogers would qualify, as would Mark Twain, who took a particular aim at contemporary religions of his day. Are these curmudgeons people we want to be like, or are they perhaps people that some of us have already become? As Unitarian Universalists, we have tacitly accepted the 10 points of essential belief articulated by UU minister David Rankin, including the freedom of religious expression, the authority of reason and conscience, the search for truth, and the worth and dignity of each human being. Can we reconcile this set of beliefs and implicit corresponding behaviors with an irreverent and self-righteous attitude and a dismissive approach to modern society? Or alternately, does Rankin's set of beliefs compel in some of us some measure of curmudgeonly attitude? And what about the shared values adopted at General Assembly in June 2024, where UUs voted to replace the 7 existing principles and 6 sources language in our bylaws with language describing Unitarian Universalism through these shared values, all centered around love? Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence and acknowledge our place in it. Pluralism. We are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all feel welcome and can thrive. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Equity. We declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. Those are all positive, proactive statements. But in some ways, those statements seem inadequate to include those of us, through nurture or nature, have chosen to challenge in some unconventional ways those injustices that persist, even grow as we watch. Isn't there more to do or more to be? Mark Twain was a curmudgeonly commentator on religion. Even though some of his writings are now a century old, they have a familiar echo in today's popular American political and religious culture, in which every political speech is closed, "God bless America." He says about the gate of heaven, and to those of us who are not likely to make it that far, the following: "This is a Christian country. Why, so is hell. Insomuch as straight is the way and narrow is the gate, and few they are who enter thereat, has to be the natural effect of making hell the only really prominent Christian community in any of the worlds. We don't brag of this, and certainly it is not proper to brag and boast that America is a Christian country, when we all know that certainly 5/6 of our population could not enter at that narrow gate." But Twain goes a little bit beyond describing hell as a Christian country. As we heard in the readings, he has his own definition of God and what God's characteristics ought to be. It's different, one must admit, than what is heard in most pulpits on a typical Sunday morning. And again, restating, there would not be any hell except the one we live in from the cradle to the grave. There would not be any heaven. Sounds a little like John Lennon, actually. The kind described in the world's Bibles. He would spend some of his eternities trying to forgive himself for making man unhappy when he could have made him happy with the same effort. And he would spend the rest of his time studying astronomy. Are these sentiments tolerable to us? If Mr. Twain were to sign a pledge card and join us on Sunday mornings, would we feel okay with his views in light of David Rankin's freedom of religious expression, the authority of reason and conscience, the search for truth, and the worth and dignity of each human being, and in light of the shared values recently adopted by our General Assembly? I suspect that we would feel comfortable with his freedom of religious expression, use of authority of reason and conscience, and the search for truth. What may give us pause with him, and with others who have been labeled curmudgeons, is his commitment to the worth and dignity of each human being and his commitment to love at the center. But his comments and the comments of others deprecating the human race are in a way self-deprecating as well. When Charles M. Schulz, creator of Peanuts, has Charlie Brown say, "I love mankind, it's people I can't stand," he's not just talking about everybody else, he's also talking about himself. And this does seem to be the disquieting theme that runs through the quotes and sayings attributed to identified curmudgeons and other writers over the years. It's the uncomfortable role, unwillingly thrust upon us, of being a human being. But that human role is a part played by these individuals in a fearless manner in a society that increasingly grows more fearful of life itself. But that speaking out is often tempered by the demonstrative underlying humanity that drives it. As Kurt Vonnegut says, no matter how corrupt, greedy, and heartless our government, our corporations, our media, and our religious and charitable institutions may become, the music will still be wonderful. If I should ever die, God forbid, let this be my epitaph. The only proof he needed for the existence of God was music. That works for me too. I really like curmudgeons. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it's the same attraction that drew me to this church. There is an intense, very visible humanity in each of these people, no pretense to conformity with the rules that society has laid out for us. But they aren't destructive, nor are they cynics. They do live their lives with conflict, neither as idealists nor as cynics, but merely afraid of contradictions. There's always some expectation that we can do better, to create a better place not just for them, but for all of us. It's that mix of fierce rejection and hopefulness, humor and stark reality that makes a curmudgeon what he, she, or they are, and it looks really human. So may we be.